The chamber stretched impossibly high above her, its walls pulsing with bioluminescent patterns that seemed to mock her human eyes. Around her, representatives of 12 different species sat in judgment beings with multiple eyes, scaled skin, and appendages that defied Earth's evolutionary logic. "Human," spoke the Archon, a being whose voice resonated through translucent gill slits. "You stand accused of the highest crimes against galactic order. Your species' reckless expansion has disrupted 3 star systems, contaminated 2 pristine worlds, and worst of all, you have shown sympathy for the devourer of Kepler-7. Elena lifted her chin defiantly. As a xenobiologist, she had spent 15 years studying misunderstood creatures across the galaxy. Her crime? Publishing research suggesting that the so-called devourer might not be the mindless killing machine the hegemony claimed it to be. Her data showed patterns of behavior that suggested intelligence, even wounded communication attempts. "The creature you call the devourer," Elena said, her voice steady despite the fear coursing through her veins, "has never actually killed anyone who didn't attack it first. Every incident in your records shows silence." The Archon's tentacles flared with angry color. "Your human arrogance blinds you to the truth. The devourer has terrorized the galaxy for 3 centuries. Entire colonies have been abandoned at mere rumors of its approach." The other council members chittered and hissed their agreement. Elena recognized the fear in their alien features, the same fear she had seen in the eyes of researchers who refused to study Earth's great white sharks or grizzly bears. Fear that prevented understanding. "You will face the traditional punishment for your crimes," the Archon continued. "Death by the very creature you claim to understand. Guards, take her to the containment facility on Zarian Prime." As the guards seized her arms, Elena felt a strange calm settle over her. She had faced dangerous creatures before, cornered leopards in the Amazon, wounded polar bears in the Arctic, even a displaced saltwater crocodile in her laboratory. The key was never to show fear, never to approach with aggression. Every creature, no matter how dangerous, could be understood if you took the time to truly see them. The transport ship that carried her to Zarian Prime was a sleek vessel that reminded Elena of a manta ray. Through the viewport, she watched stars wheel past, each one representing worlds she would never see again. The guards, tall, insectoid beings with compound eyes, spoke in clicking languages she couldn't understand, but their meaning was clear. They were taking her to die. Zarian Prime appeared as a rust-colored world scarred by ancient impact craters. The containment facility was built into a mountainside, its walls constructed from materials that could withstand nuclear blasts. As they descended toward the landing platform, Elena caught a glimpse of the massive containment cella cavern, large enough to hold a blue whale, sealed behind barriers that shimmered with deadly energy. The warden, a being whose species Elena didn't recognize, greeted them with what might have been a smile. "Another one for the devourer?" It asked in accented standard. "How delightful. It's been months since the last feeding." The creature grows restless. Elena was processed through the facility's security systems, her personal effects cataloged and stored. They allowed her, too, keep her field clothes, practical cargo pants, and a sturdy jacket that had seen her through countless expeditions. As she was led toward the containment area, she noticed the facility staff giving her pitying looks. They had seen this before. She realized other condemned beings thrown to the creature they called the devourer. The containment cell's entrance was a massive airlock system that required 3 separate biometric scans to open. As the final barrier cycled open, Elena felt a wave of stale air wash over her air that carried scents of metal, stone, and something else, something alive and afraid. "Goodbye, human," the warden said as the guards pushed her forward. "May your death be swift." The airlock sealed behind her with a finality that echoed through the cavern. Elena stood in the dim light, her heart pounding as she waited for her eyes to adjust to the darkness. Somewhere in this space lurked the creature that had terrorized the galaxy for 3 centuries. She took a slow, careful step forward, remembering every lesson from her years in the field. Show no fear. Move with purpose, but not aggression. Listen. Watch. Understand. From the shadows came a sound, not a roar of rage, but something that made Elena's breath catch in her throat. It was a sound she had heard before. In the depths of Earth's oceans and the loneliest corners of its wilderness. It was the sound of a creature calling out in profound, desperate loneliness. The containment cell was vast, carved from living rock, and illuminated by strips of bioluminescent material that cast eerie shadows across the walls. Elena moved slowly, her footsteps echoing in the cavernous space as she tried to locate the source of that haunting call. The sound came again, a low, resonant vibration that seemed to emerge from the very stones around her. She had heard similar sounds before, during her time studying humpback whales off the coast of Alaska. The same deep, mournful quality that spoke of intelligence trying to reach across an impossible divide. But this sound carried something else, a note of such profound sadness that it made her chest ache. Elena settled into a cross-legged position on the cold stone floor, a technique she had learned from years of animal observation. Sudden movements triggered fight-or-flight responses in most creatures. Better to make herself small, non-threatening, and wait for the creature to reveal itself on its own terms. The minutes stretched into an hour. Elena remained motionless, controlling her breathing and listening to the subtle sounds of the cavern. Water dripped somewhere in the distance. Air moved through hidden vents. And beneath it all, she could hear something else, the sound of massive lungs drawing breath somewhere in the deeper shadows. Then she saw it. A single eye, easily the size of a dinner plate, caught the dim light as it peered at her from a crevice in the rock wall. The eye was not the cold reptilian orb she had expected, but something that looked almost familiar. It reminded her of the eyes of the elephants she had worked with in Kenya ancient, intelligent, and filled with a depth of emotion that most humans never bothered to recognize. Elena forced herself to remain still as more of the creature emerged from its hiding place. It was indeed massive, easily 30 feet in length, with a serpentine body covered in scales that shifted color like oil on water. But it was the way it moved that caught her attention. There was no predatory stalking, no aggressive posturing. Instead, the creature approached with the careful, hesitant movements of an animal that had been hurt too many times. When it was close enough that Elena could have reached out and touched it, the creature stopped. Its great head, a magnificent fusion of dragon and whale, lowered until it was level with her own. She could feel its breath, warm and surprisingly sweet, washing over her face. For a long moment, they simply looked at each other. Elena saw intelligence in those enormous eyes, and something else that made her heart skip a beat. She saw recognition. This creature knew she was different from the others who had been thrown into its cell. Slowly, carefully, Elena extended her hand. Not to touch, that would be presumptuous, but to show that she carried no weapons, harbored no aggression. The creature's massive head tilted slightly, studying her gesture with obvious curiosity. "Hello," Elena whispered, her voice barely audible in the vast space. "I'm Elena. I'm not here to hurt you." The creature's response was immediate and heartbreaking. It made a sound unlike anything Elena had ever heard, a complex vocalization that seemed to carry layers of meaning. There was question in it, and hope, and beneath it all, a desperate need for connection that transcended species barriers. Elena had spent her career studying animal communication, and she recognized the patterns in the creature's vocalizations. It was trying to talk to her, using sounds that were far more sophisticated than any animal language she had encountered. This wasn't just intelligence. This was a form of communication that might rival human speech in its complexity. "You're not a monster at all, are you?" Elena said softly. "You're just alone." The creature's response was to settle its massive form more comfortably on the stone floor, bringing its head closer to Elena's level. Its scales, she noticed, were incredibly beautiful, not the dark, menacing armor described in hegemony reports, but something that shimmered with subtle colors that reminded her of sunset on ocean waves. As the hours passed, Elena began to understand the rhythm of the creature's communication. It would make a sound, then wait for her response. When she spoke, it listened with obvious attention, its great head turning slightly to catch every nuance of her voice. They were having a conversation, she realized, perhaps the first real conversation this creature had experienced in centuries. The creature's body language spoke of extreme loneliness. It held itself in a way that reminded Elena of the rescued animals she had worked with, creatures that had been isolated for so long they had forgotten how to interact with others. But unlike those animals, this being was trying to bridge the gap between them with an intelligence and determination that took her breath away. When Elena finally felt fatigue tugging at her consciousness, she made a decision that would have horrified the Hegemony Council. She lay down on the stone floor, using her jacket as a pillow, and closed her eyes. The creature's reaction was immediate. It made a soft, questioning sound, and Elena felt the air move as it shifted position. When she opened her eyes, she saw that it had moved closer. Its massive form curved in a protective semicircle around her smaller body. "It's okay," Elena murmured, settling back into her makeshift bed. "I trust you." She felt the creature's breathing slow and deepen, synchronizing with her own. As sleep claimed her, Elena's last coherent thought was that she had never felt safer in her life. In the monitoring room above, the facility's night shift workers stared at their screens in disbelief. The thermal imaging showed the human's body heat signature nestled against the creature's massive form, both of them breathing in perfect harmony. For the first time in 3 centuries, the devourer of Kepler-7 was sleeping peacefully. Elena woke to the sensation of gentle warmth enveloping her body. For a moment, disoriented by sleep, she thought she was back in her apartment in New Geneva, wrapped in her favorite blanket. Then consciousness returned fully, and she realized she was lying against the creature's massive chest, rising and falling with each of its deep, steady breaths. The creature had positioned itself so that Elena was cradled in the natural curve of its body. One massive foreleg extended to create a windbreak against the cavern's drafts. The scales beneath her cheek were warm and surprisingly soft, with a texture that reminded her of river stones worn smooth by countless years of flowing water. Elena remained still, not wanting to startle her unlikely companion. In the improved lighting of the cavern's artificial dawn cycle, she could see details that had been hidden in the previous day's shadows. The creature's scales weren't uniformly colored. They formed intricate patterns that seemed to shift and flow like living art along its neck and chest. She could see scars, old wounds that spoke of battles fought not in aggression, but in desperate self-defense. As she watched, the creature's great eye opened, fixing on her with an expression of such gentle contentment that Elena felt tears prick at her eyes. This supposedly terrifying monster, had spent the night protecting her, keeping her warm and safe in a way that spoke of profound kindness. "Good morning," Elena whispered, her voice rusty from sleep. The creature's response was a low, melodious sound that seemed to vibrate through Elena's entire body. It was, she realized, the creature's equivalent of a greeting, a sound that carried notes of pleasure, relief, and something that could only be described as affection. Elena sat up slowly, and the creature adjusted its position to continue providing her with support. As she looked around the cavern in the better light, she began to see evidence of the creature's intelligence everywhere. Stones had been arranged in careful patterns near the walls, not random placement, but deliberate design that served both functional and aesthetic purposes. Water had been channeled through carefully carved grooves to create small pools that reflected the bioluminescent lighting in beautiful patterns. "You've made this place into a home," Elena said with wonder. "A beautiful home." The creature's head swayed in what Elena was beginning to recognize as a gesture of pleasure. It began to vocalize again, this time in a series of complex tones that Elena found herself unconsciously trying to imitate. To her surprise, the creature responded with obvious excitement when she managed to approximate one of its sounds. They spent the next several hours in an intensive communication session. Elena, drawing on her experience with dolphin and whale, communication, began to map the creature's vocal patterns. She discovered that it had different tones for different concepts, one for water, another for food, a third for comfort. Most remarkably, it seemed to have a specific sound that it used only when looking directly at her, a sound that Elena couldn't help but interpret as her name in the creature's language. As their communication deepened, Elena began to understand the creature's story. Through a combination of vocalizations and surprisingly expressive gestures, it conveyed a tale of tragic loss. It had once been part of a group of family. Elena realized that it had been hunted by the very species that now comprised the Hegemony Council. The creature's attacks on their ships hadn't been predatory behavior, but desperate attempts to communicate, to ask why its kind were being killed. The creature showed Elena a section of the cavern wall where it had carved symbols into the stone knot, random scratches but carefully crafted images that told the story of its people. Elena saw representations of creatures like her companion, living in harmony with their environment, working together to build beautiful cities that integrated seamlessly with the natural world. Then came the images of ships, weapons, and the systematic destruction of everything the creature had loved. "You're not just the last of your kind," Elena said, her voice thick with emotion. "You're a survivor of genocide." The creature's response was a sound so filled with grief that Elena felt her heart break. It had been alone for 3 centuries, carrying the weight of its people's extinction, branded as a monster by the very beings who had destroyed its world. Elena reached out slowly, her hand stopping just short of the creature's massive head. "May I?" she asked softly. The creature's response was to lower its head, bringing it within reach of Elena's hand. When her fingers first made contact with its scales, both of them seemed to freeze in wonder. The creature's skin was warm and alive, and Elena could feel the gentle pulse of its heartbeat through her palm. For the creature, it was the first gentle touch it had received in 3 centuries. They remained like that for a long time, Elena's small hand resting on the creature's massive head while it made soft sounds of contentment. In that moment, both of them understood that something profound had occurred. They had found each other across the vast gulf of species and circumstance. 2 beings who had been marked as outcasts by a universe that feared what it didn't understand. As the day progressed, Elena learned more about her companion's remarkable intelligence. It showed her how it had learned to manipulate the cavern's environment, creating currents of air that carried away waste and channeled fresh water from hidden springs. It had even learned to influence the bioluminescent organisms that provided light, creating patterns that Elena slowly recognized as a form of artistic expression. Most remarkably, the creature had been observing the facility's routines for decades, learning the patterns of guard shifts and security protocols. It understood exactly how its prison functioned, and Elena realized that it could have escaped at any time if it had truly wanted to. Instead, it had remained, perhaps hoping that someday someone would come who would see past the fear and recognize it for what it truly was. As evening approached, Elena found herself curled against the creature's side once again, this time by choice rather than circumstance. The creature's massive form radiated warmth and safety, and its gentle breathing had become as comforting to her as her own heartbeat. "Tomorrow," Elena said softly, "they'll probably come to check on what's left of me. They're going to be very surprised." The creature's response was a complex vocalization that Elena had learned to interpret as amusement. It understood the irony of the situation as well as she did. The hegemony had thrown her to their ultimate monster, expecting to find her torn apart by the morning. Instead, they would find her sleeping peacefully in the arms of a creature that had revealed itself to be one of the gentlest beings she had ever encountered. As they settled into sleep together, Elena felt a profound sense of purpose settling over her. She had spent her career studying misunderstood creatures, but she had never encountered one whose story needed to be told as desperately as this one. The creature beside her wasn't just a survivor. It was living proof that the universe's greatest monsters were often just broken beings who had forgotten how to be anything else. She was going to make sure the galaxy learned the truth, no matter what it cost her. Asterisk. Elena woke to the sound of distant alarms echoing through the facility. Her companion's massive head was already raised, its great ears delicate, almost fin-like appendages she hadn't noticed before twitching as it listened to sounds beyond human hearing. The creature's body language had changed from the relaxed contentment of the previous days to alert tension, and Elena felt her own heart rate quicken in response. "They're coming, aren't they?" she said softly, her hand moving instinctively to rest on the creature's neck. The creature's response was a low, complex vocalization that Elena had learned to interpret as confirmation mixed with protectiveness. Over the past 3 days, their communication had evolved into something approaching true language. Elena could now distinguish between dozens of different tones and meanings, while the creature had begun to understand and even attempt to mimic some of her simpler words. The sound of approaching footsteps echoed through the outer corridors, accompanied by the harsh buzz of energy weapons being charged. Elena could hear voices multiple species speaking in rapid, nervous tones. They were afraid, she realized. Afraid of what they expected to find in the containment cell. "Listen to me," Elena said urgently, turning to face her companion. "When they open that door, they're going to expect to see a monster. They're going to be ready to kill you to protect themselves from what they think you are. But I need you to show them who you really are. Can you do that?" The creature's great eye fixed on hers with an intensity that took her breath away. In its depths, she saw not just intelligence, but wisdom born of centuries of pain and the hard-won understanding that had come from their time together. The creature made a sound that Elena had come to recognize as a promise. The outer airlock began to cycle open, and Elena felt her companion's massive body tense like a coiled spring. But instead of preparing to attack, the creature was positioning itself protectively around her, its huge form creating a living barrier between Elena and the approaching threat. The inner door opened with a hiss of equalizing pressure, and Elena heard the sharp intake of breath from multiple beings as they saw what awaited them. She was sitting calmly in the curve of the creature's body, her hand resting on its neck, both of them breathing in perfect synchronization. "Impossible," whispered a voice Elena recognized as belonging to the facility's warden. "The human should be dead. The devourer should have torn her apart hours ago." "Stand down your weapons," Elena called out, her voice carrying clearly through the cavern. "There's no danger here." A figure stepped into the light, the warden, accompanied by a squad of heavily armed guards representing 3 different species. Their weapons were trained on the creature, but Elena could see the confusion in their eyes. This wasn't the scene of carnage they had expected to find. "Dr. Vasquez," the warden said, his voice shaking slightly. "Step away from the creature immediately. You're clearly in some kind of shock. That thing is the most dangerous predator in known space." Elena stood slowly, her hand never leaving the creature's neck. "No," she said firmly. This being is the most misunderstood victim in known space. And I can prove it. The creature, as if understanding her words, began to vocalize. But instead of the supposedly terrifying roar the guards expected, it produced a series of complex, musical tones that filled the cavern with haunting beauty. The sounds were clearly structured, obviously intelligent, and carried emotional undertones that transcended species barriers. "It's trying to communicate," Elena said, her voice filled with wonder, even though she had heard these sounds many times before. "It's been trying to communicate for 3 centuries, but everyone was too afraid to listen." One of the guards, a reptilian being with scaled skin and multiple eyes, lowered his weapon slightly. "Those sounds, they're not random. There's a pattern there." Elena nodded eagerly. "More than a pattern. It's a language. A complex, sophisticated language that rivals anything in the known galaxy. This being isn't just intelligent. It's a scholar, an artist, a philosopher. It's been alone for 300 years, carrying the entire cultural knowledge of its extinct people." The creature, as if responding to Elena's words, moved to one wall of the cavern where it had carved its historical records. Using gentle gestures, it began to indicate specific symbols while vocalizing in what Elena now recognized as a teaching tone. "It's showing you its history," Elena said, her voice thick with emotion. "The true history of what happened to its people. Not the monster stories you've been telling yourselves, but the real tragedy of a peaceful species that was hunted to extinction because you were afraid of them." The warden stepped closer, his weapon still raised, but his expression changing from fear to fascination. "Even if what you're saying is true, Dr. Vasquez, this creature has been responsible for numerous attacks on hegemony vessels." "Defensive actions," Elena corrected firmly. "Every single incident in your records shows the same pattern. Your ships approached first, often with weapons charged. The creature tried to communicate, and when that failed, it defended itself. Wouldn't you do the same if aliens kept attacking you while you were trying to talk to them?" The creature moved closer to Elena, its massive head lowering until it was level with her shoulder. The gesture was clearly protective, but there was nothing aggressive about it. Instead, it was the body language of a being that had found something precious and was determined to keep it safe. "Look at it," Elena said softly. "Really look at it. This isn't the posture of a predator. This is the behavior of a protector. For 3 days, it's done nothing but care for me. It kept me warm, made sure I had access to clean water, and even shared its food with me. Does that sound like the behavior of a mindless killing machine?" The reptilian guard had lowered his weapon completely now, and Elena could see tears forming in his multiple eyes. "My ancestors," he whispered. "My ancestors were part of the coalition that ... that hunted them. We were told they were monsters, that they threatened the entire galaxy." The creature turned its great head toward the guard and made a soft, questioning sound. Elena felt her heart skip as she recognized the tone. It was the same sound the creature made when it was trying to comfort her. "It's not angry with you," Elena said in wonder. "After everything that was done to its people, it's not angry. It's trying to comfort you." The warden's weapon clattered to the floor as the full weight of the situation hit him. "What have we done?" he whispered. "What have we all done?" Elena felt the creature's massive form shift slightly, and she looked up to see it watching the guards with an expression of profound hope. After 3 centuries of isolation and fear, it was finally being seen for what it truly was, not a monster, but a being of incredible gentleness and wisdom, who had been shaped by unimaginable loss into something even more beautiful. "We're going to make this right," Elena said, her voice carrying the weight of a promise. "The galaxy is going to learn the truth about what happened here. And this magnificent being is never going to be alone again." The creature's response was a sound of such pure joy that it brought tears to every eye in the cavern. For the first time in 3 centuries, the last survivor of a murdered people had hope for the future. 6 months after the revelation in the containment cell, Elena stood on the observation deck of the new Geneva Science Station, watching as the first cultural exchange vessel prepared to dock. The ship's design was unlike anything the hegemony had ever built. Organic curves that seemed to flow like water, surfaces that shimmered with the same opalescent beauty as her companions. Scales. Nervous? Asked a familiar voice behind her. Elena turned to find Dr. Marcus Chun, the head of the Galactic Xenobiology Institute, approaching with a tablet full of data. His expression was one of barely contained excitement mixed with the kind of scientific wonder that Elena had come to associate with groundbreaking discoveries. Terrified, Elena admitted with a smile, but also more excited than I've ever been in my life. Through the transparent aluminum of the observation deck, Elena could see into the docking bay where her companion waited. The being she had first met in that dark containment cell had transformed over the past months, its posture straightening as it shed the defensive crouch of centuries. The creature's scales had brightened, taking on colors that Elena suspected were closer to their natural brilliance, deep blues that shifted to purple, accented with threads of silver that caught the light like captured starlight. The creature was no longer alone. Around it, a small group of beings from various species worked together to prepare for the arrival of the exchange vessel. They were the first members of what Elena had come to think of as the Reconciliation Project beings who had volunteered to help right the wrongs of the past. The linguistic analysis is complete, Dr. Chun said, his voice filled with awe. Elena, what you've uncovered, it's not just a language. It's a complete philosophical framework. The concepts embedded in their communication system are centuries ahead of anything we've developed. Elena nodded, her eyes still fixed on her companion. Over the past months, as more linguists and cultural anthropologists had joined their research, the true scope of what had been lost became clear. The creature's people hadn't just been another species. They had been the galaxy's first attempt at true interspecies harmony. Their entire civilization had been built around the concept of understanding and cooperation across species barriers. The irony is overwhelming, Elena said softly. We destroyed the one species that could have prevented the very conflicts that led to their destruction. A soft chime indicated that the exchange vessel had completed docking. Elena felt her heart rate increase as she watched the airlock cycle open. What emerged was a small group of beings unlike anything in the hegemony. Records creatures that shared obvious genetic markers with her companion, but were smaller, more delicate, with scales that seemed to glow with their own inner light.